NC Pork. Good for the plate, great for the state.
Welcome to This Week in College Football with David Glenn, powered by NC Pork. Thank you so much for joining us again this week for our new edition of Bold North State Football Daily. I'm Chris Edwards, happy to be back here with David for year 3 of the quickly growing North Carolina Sports Network, which, thanks to you, now has almost 50,000 YouTube subscribers, a number that ranks in the top 2% in the entire world. Please click that subscribe button on YouTube or the follow button on our podcast and various other social media channels if you haven't done so already. And thank you again for your consistent support. Now, on the show this week, DG and I are mostly going to look ahead at the upcoming week's college football matchups. We'll also discuss some of the sport's biggest headlines and take a quick glance back at some of DG's expert analysis on the biggest games and developments from the previous week's schedule. DG, now in his 39th year covering college football, both here in North Carolina and around the Atlantic Coast Conference. And as we jump into this week's matchups, a quick reminder that the pork industry is a huge part of our North Carolina economy, with more than 42,000 jobs and an economic impact of almost $11 billion per year. Learn more at ncpork.org. That's NC Pork, good for the plate, great for the state. DG, great to see you, my friend. How are you this week?
I'm doing well, Chris. It's great to see you as always. For the record, since I usually wear North Carolina Sports Network gear for this weekly show, this sweatshirt, JWB, well, there it is. JWB stands for Jimmy's Wrightsville Beach, the bar down at the coast that we talk about a lot on the show and one of our great sponsors. My t-shirt today is actually from Pirate Radio, our good friends in Greenville, North Carolina, where we were last Thursday night, hanging out with them and watching the Pirates win that Thursday night nationally televised game. I'm not going to derobe to show you my Pirate Radio t-shirt. Everybody will just have to take my word for it. But we had a great extended weekend, Greenville, Wilmington, back to the Triangle, and we're excited about this week's show and also heading back to Chapel Hill with our tailgate tour this Saturday.
Well, DG, some of the big winners in Week 8 included Alabama, Georgia, Vanderbilt, Notre Dame, Louisville, SMU, and Georgia Tech. And a little closer to home, you mentioned East Carolina's big win and, of course, the Catamounts of Western Carolina. We'll have more on last week's results coming up later in today's show, but we get right into this week's biggest contest, beginning with those involving teams here in the Bold North State and continuing with the 3 top national matchups involving some of the other teams that we know very well. And this segment brought to you by our great friends at NC by Train. You can skip the traffic, kick back, and enjoy the ride with NC by Train, whether you're heading to see family, catching a game, or just exploring the Bold North State. Amtrak service makes travel easy and affordable. Book your next ride today at ncbytrain.org and see North Carolina the relaxing way. DG will start in Chapel Hill at the South's oldest rivalry, number 16 Virginia. The Cavaliers are 6-1. They're visiting 2-4 North Carolina. This is on the ACC network Saturday at noon. We will also be there with our Old North State tailgate and traveling sports circus. And no real surprise, the Cavaliers a favorite on the road. Virginia a 9-point favorite at Kenan Stadium.
Yeah, let's start this preview with a very basic premise, even though many of our viewers and listeners may think I have lost my mind when I say what I'm about to say. In terms of overall talent and some other very important things, the 6-1 Cavaliers are not night and day better than the 2-4 Tar Heels. They're just not. Now, the Wahoos are definitely better than the Heels. Don't get me wrong here overall. But their sheer combination of skill and depth and experience probably ranks in the middle third of the ACC, just as the Tar Heels combination of those things definitely ranks in the bottom third of the ACC. 2 things UVA does have this season, and 2 things Carolina has lacked for most of Bill Belichick's first year in Chapel Hill, are 1, a very high-quality quarterback, and 2, as the season has unfolded, a sky-high level of confidence. If the Wahoos get off to an impressive start at Kenan Stadium on Saturday afternoon, those 2 advantages alone could lead to a massive margin of victory for the visitors. However, if the Tar Heels somehow build on their close loss at Cal last week, where they were perhaps one goal line fumble away from their first Power Four victory of the Belichick era. And if they start this UVA game well and get whatever fans who show up riled up about a potential upset of a nationally ranked opponent at Keaton Stadium, anything could happen, seriously. As discussed in our quarterbacks segment together last week, Virginia QB Chandler Morris, a North Texas transfer, is both one of the best quarterbacks in the ACC this season and possibly the best true run pass threat from that position in the entire conference. The bottom line is that Morris throws it way better than most of the run first quarterbacks, and he runs it much better than most of the throw first quarterbacks. That means that Belichick's son, Steve, the team's defensive coordinator in Chapel Hill, will have his hands full for the Tar Heels' defensive game plan against the only prolific offense that UVA has had during head coach Tony Elliott's 4 seasons in Charlottesville. One that is averaging, as we speak, an ACC best 40 points per game. However, UVA is not a consistently dominant team at the line of scrimmage on either side of the ball. So if the Tar Heels can somehow find that amazing combination of creating turnovers defensively while at least moving the chains offensively against what's a kind of a middling UVA defense, that's at least a potential path to their first victory against a quality opponent this season. To be clear, would I bet on an upset here? Absolutely not. I'm just trying to lay out the possible road to get there.
What about the Wolfpack of NC State, DG? NC State 4-3, State's on the road at Pittsburgh this week. The Panthers are 5-2. This is 3:30 Saturday afternoon, also on ACC Network. Pitt is a 6-point home favorite.
Yeah, here's a very quick bottom line for you in this one. NC State's first possible, and in my eyes, the less likely path to victory at Pitt would be for the Wolfpack's occasionally explosive offense, led by 3 superb sophomores, the quarterback C.J. Bailey, the running back Hollywood Smothers, the wide receiver Terrell Anderson. For those guys to make a handful of explosive plays against Coach Pat Narduzzi's extremely aggressive and very well-coached Panthers defense, which may be the 3rd best unit in the ACC on that side of the ball, behind only Louisville and Miami. Pitt's giving up only 20 points per game this season. That does rank 3rd in the league, and its defense is led by NFL-caliber linebackers in junior Rasheem Biles and especially redshirt junior Kyle Lewis. Both players were All-ACC selections last year, and Lewis was an All-American. Meanwhile, although Bailey is a fantastic passer and Smothers a highly productive runner against many of the Wolfpack's opponents this season, the Pack is coming off that lopsided 36-7 loss at Notre Dame when the Irish defense absolutely overwhelmed State in every conceivable way. State's only other path to victory, and also unlikely perhaps, but far more conceivable if you've watched both of these teams play this season, would be for the Wolfpack's embattled defense to rise up and figure out a way to rattle and generate sacks and turnovers from Pitt's 18-year-old true freshman quarterback, Mason Heinchel. While it's true that the Panthers are 3-0 since Heinchel replaced the Alabama transfer Eli Holstein as their starting QB, it's also true that Heinchel has thrown 3 interceptions and has taken a whopping 14 sacks in those 3 games, and that the opponents that Pitt beat all came from the bottom half of the ACC. 1-6 Boston College, 3-4 Florida State, 3-4 Syracuse. One other reminder, Pitt's offensive coordinator is former Western Carolina OC Cade Bell, son of Catamounts head coach Kerwin Bell. And one of the Panthers' best offensive players is Desmond Reed, the former Western Carolina star, who was an All-American last season for Pitt as an all-purpose guy and an honorable mention All-ACC selection as a running back. Reed has been limited by injuries at times this season for the Panthers, but he was one of Pitt's stars just 2 weeks ago when the Panthers went to Tallahassee and beat the Seminoles. Final tidbit on this one, Pitt has been truly elite this year on special teams, and NC State has been mostly bad this year on special teams. The Panthers so far really like their place kicker, a true freshman walk-on named Trey Bukowski, who has made 15 of 16 field goal attempts and 30 of 31 extra points. Meanwhile, a former walk-on, fifth-year senior Caleb Junko, has Pitt number 2 in the ACC in net punting at more than 42 yards per game, and he rarely yields any return yardage. Finally, return man Kenny Johnson, a junior who's also a dangerous wide receiver, is second in the ACC at 14 yards per punt return, and he would also be second in the ACC in kick returns at 32 yards per game if he had enough attempts to qualify in that category. I don't expect a close game in this one, but if it is close, the special teams could be the thing that tilt the scales in favor of the Panthers.
DG, game 3 that we're going to hit on is Wake Forest. The Demon Deacons at 4-2. They're home this week, taking on 5-2 SMU. This is a noon game on Saturday on the CW. It is SMU who gallops into Deektown as a 4-point favorite.
Yeah, by this point in the season, I think everyone in our audience knows our Wake Forest snapshot, right? First-year head coach Jake Dickert, formerly of Washington State. Limited passing attack led by the athletic South Carolina transfer and now sixth-year senior quarterback Robbie Ashford. An elite running back in the senior Damon Claiborne, who's averaging almost 8 yards per carry this season and is definitely an NFL prospect. An exciting wideout and return man in the redshirt freshman Chris Barnes. An impressively, I think, overachieving defense, although mainly against lower caliber competition. And at this point, a 4-2 record that, remember, would be 5-1 if not for that truly horrific missed call in the Demon Deacons overtime loss to Georgia Tech, a team that's still unbeaten and is now ranked number 12 nationally. All of that said, 5-2 SMU does have some significant advantages over the Deacs. Remember, the Mustangs finished 11-3, made the ACC championship game, and competed in the college football playoff just last year, their first as a member of the ACC. We had seen Coach Rhett Lashley and the Mustangs up close 2 years ago, 2023, when they beat East Carolina convincingly in Greenville on their way to another 11-3 season, and in that case, the American Conference Championship in their final year in that league. Now, after back-to-back 11-win campaigns, both of which ended up in the national top 25 rankings, SMU still has a shot at a third consecutive special season. How have they done it? With a combination of homegrown talent from the legendary Lone Star State and a whole bunch of money from wealthy alumni and supporters, which both enabled them to join the ACC and in the transfer portal era has enabled them to supplement their depth chart with big-time talent from other major programs. Remember that SMU's invitation from the ACC came with the requirement that the Mustangs would forego $270 million in media rights revenue. They will not get a regular full-size check from the league until 2033. How can anyone possibly afford that? Well, in the summer of 2023, within 5 days of SMU officially accepting the ACC's offer, more than 30 university supporters stepped forward and donated a collective $100 million plus to the cause in those 5 days. And some of those same people also own or run companies that have been able to help with NIL money in the transfer portal on top of those donations. 3 of SMU's most accomplished players this year, the redshirt junior quarterback Kevin Jennings, the senior tight end RJ Maryland, and the senior safety Isaiah Wacobia, they all grew up in the Dallas area, and they went straight to the Mustangs right out of high school. But the entire starting offensive line, for example, previously started at places like Arkansas or Miami or Oklahoma. And other starters were backups at places like Texas or Texas A&M, and they wanted more playing time, sometimes closer to home at another in-state school after being high school stars in that huge state, which has, believe it or not, 13 FBS level programs. The magical combination of Rhett Lashley, that huge SMU money, and those productive talent pipelines has enabled a program that infamously received the death penalty for NCAA rules violations in the 1980s to be very nationally relevant over these last 3 years after basically a 30-year plus period without a single top 25 finish in the national polls. I will be surprised and very impressed if the Demon Deacons make this a down to the wire game on Saturday, as they did so impressively against Georgia Tech.
DJ, as we wrap up this opening segment, I'm curious, are there other games involving at least one team in our state that you think is worth maybe more of a brief mention this week?
Short list with 4-3 Duke and 4-3 East Carolina both off this week. There are only two other FBS games involving an in-state team. Appalachian State, which is off to a 4-3 start under first-year head coach Dow Loggins, hits the road Saturday to take on 4-3 Old Dominion. That's a noon game on ESPNU. The Mountaineers were stunned 45-37 last week in Boone by Coastal Carolina, which just dissected the App State defense under the direction of dual threat senior quarterback Samari Collier, who had played very little and sometimes not even very well during the Chanticleer's unimpressive 3-3 start. Now App is a 13-point underdog at ODU, and the Mountaineers, given their remaining schedule in Sun Belt competition, will need to improve significantly in the coming weeks if they're going to reach a bowl game this year. Meanwhile, Charlotte, which has no realistic chance at a bowl in year one under head coach Tim Albin, does get a fairly prominent national TV window this week as the 1-6 49ers host 6-1 North Texas on Friday, but as a whopping 27-point underdog. That game, 7 p.m. Friday on ESPN2. Lastly, at the Division II level, the only nationally ranked team in our state, 6-1 Johnson C. Smith, which is number 22 in the D2 poll, hosts 4-4 Winston-Salem State in Charlotte. The Golden Bulls cannot get where they want to go this season without beating the Rams, a team that has a much more successful track record in the CIAA historically and still can be a very tough team to beat.
Hey, North Carolina, David Glenn here. If you want a real taste of Wilmington, NC, head to the Original Saltworks restaurant, owned and operated by local legend Bob Hubbard, who's also a great friend of the DG Show and the North Carolina Sports Network. The Original Saltworks has been serving hot, hearty Southern breakfasts and lunches since the 1970s. Whether grits, omelets, biscuits, burgers, hot dogs, or sweet tea, the Original Saltworks is a truly satisfying, bold North State experience. It's fast, it's fresh, it's full of flavor, and it's always served with a smile. Open for breakfast and lunch 7 days a week, always starting at 7 a.m. It's the Original Saltworks on Oleander Drive in Wilmington.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football, powered by our friends at NC Pork. DG, we're going to dive into our national Week 9 look ahead. It's brought to you by our good friends at XL Moving and Storage, a family-owned Allied Van Lines partner here in North Carolina with more than 25 years of award-winning experience. Local, long distance, or commercial, they do it all. Learn more and get a free quote at excelms.com. That's XL Moving and Storage. This week, our national spotlight will focus on the only 3 ranked games that this week's entire national schedule has to offer, with all 3 coming, as you might expect, from the mighty Southeastern Conference. We'll start in Norman, where number 8 Ole Miss is 6-1. They visit 13th ranked Oklahoma. The Sooners also 6-1. This is Saturday at noon, televised on ABC, DG, and Oklahoma a 4-point home favorite.
Yeah, since you mentioned that mighty SEC angle, as we dive into this matchup, I want to point out that 9 of the top 18 contenders for this year's college football playoff, including both of these teams, Ole Miss and Oklahoma, are members of the Southeastern Conference, a number that is far higher than that of any other league, including the Big Ten. For comparison, no other conference has more than 3 teams in that top 18 contender list, and the ACC has only 2, Miami and Georgia Tech. There are some advanced team analytics right now, including ESPN's Football Power Index, that suggest that truly half of the best teams in all of college football this season, meaning 10 of the top 20, come from the Southeastern Conference, which, remember, has only 16 members. And the eyeball test, in my eyes, often supports those sorts of grand assessments. Anyway, there's a decent chance that neither Ole Miss nor Oklahoma will end up in the SEC's, say, top 3 this year. Yet here they are, both 6-1 and ranked in the national top 15. That is another reflection of that league's stunning football depth. The Sooners, led by fourth-year head coach Brent Venables, formerly Clemson's longtime defensive coordinator under Dabo Swinney, are playing elite defense this season. Led by senior defensive end R. Mason Thomas, who was all ACC last year and will be again this year. OU is number 2 nationally in scoring defense, giving up only 9 points per game and a paltry 213 yards per game. The Sooners also have a highly regarded NFL prospect at quarterback in John Mateer, a Washington State transfer coached by Wake's Jake Dickert just last year. A dual threat quarterback, Mateer ranks 4th in the SEC in passing yards per game and 2nd in total offense, but he's battling a hand injury and he has thrown only 7 touchdown passes to go with his 6 interceptions. Meanwhile, Ole Miss, led by 6th-year head coach Lane Kiffin, has been especially good offensively this season, and the Rebels' only loss so far came last week at number 9 Georgia in a high-scoring affair. The dynamics will probably be much different during this game in Norman, so don't expect to see those kinds of huge numbers on the scoreboard, but do expect to see 2 really good SEC football teams on that field.
To Nashville now, DG, where number 10 Vanderbilt is 6-1. They are hosting 15th ranked Missouri. The Tigers also 6-1. The Commodores a 2-point home favorite in a game that'll be played at 3:30 Eastern and televised by ESPN on Saturday.
Yeah, and a pretty stark contrast to the Ole Miss-Oklahoma matchup we just described. This Missouri-Vanderbilt affair has a chance to turn the scoreboard into a pinball machine. The Commodores and the Tigers rank 2nd and 3rd in the SEC in scoring offense, with both checking in right around 40 points per game. The Vandy quarterback, Diego Pavia, is a 24-year-old 6th-year senior who, remember, sued the NCAA just to get this final season of eligibility. He's one of the best leaders in college football. He's a dangerous dual threat, completing about 70% of his passes with 15 TD throws and only 4 interceptions, while also averaging more than 60 rushing yards per game. Missouri's redshirt junior quarterback, Bo Pribula, is a Penn State transfer who was stuck behind the NFL prospect Drew Aller on the depth chart during his time with the Nittany Lions. He won the Tigers starting job this spring. Pribula also has become a pretty effective dual threat, and both QBs in this game are supported by very strong rushing attacks. Missouri's sensational sophomore running back, Ahmad Hardy, who was the Sun Belt Conference Freshman of the Year last season at Louisiana Monroe, has hit the ground running, pardon the pun, in the SEC. He is averaging a conference best 120 rushing yards per game as we speak. Missouri, of course, is led by the 6th-year head coach Eli Drinkwitz, a guy we know well in these parts, former NC State assistant coach under Dave Doran, guy who as a head coach went 12-1 during his one and only season as the head coach at Appalachian State. Coach Drink does have some advantages in this game on the defensive side of the ball, both personnel-wise and statistically, led by junior edge rusher Damon Wilson II. The guy is a Georgia transfer who was mostly a backup during his 2 seasons with the Bulldogs, but he has broken out this year with the Missouri Tigers. Now the Tigers rank 4th in the SEC in scoring defense at 17 points per game. Part of the fun in this matchup is that while neither of these programs has what we would call an overwhelming football tradition, both seem to be peaking at the same time in that very deep SEC. The 5th-year Vanderbilt coach, Clark Lee, had losing records in each of his first 3 seasons with the Commodores, then finished 7-6 a year ago after a bowl win. Now Vandy has only 2 top 25 seasons in the past 75 years, but it could happen here in 2025. Meanwhile, Drinkwitz has posted 11-2 and 10-3 records over these past 2 seasons at Mizzou, putting the Tigers back in the national spotlight and the top 25 after about a decade or so of mediocrity for that program.
To our third game now, DG. It's a night game in Baton Rouge as number 20 LSU at 5-2 welcomes in Mike Elko and his third-ranked Texas A&M Aggies. A&M 7-0. Saturday night, 7:30 on ABC. Maybe a little surprise here. The Aggies a 2-point favorite on the road in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, I don't know if you have the same kind of vibe when you see these kinds of games, but whenever the lower ranked team is at home against a very prominent opponent and that home underdog's season is on the line, which it definitely is for LSU. If you get a third loss, you're out of the picture for all the most important things. Usually under those circumstances, in my experience, it feels as if the underdog usually finds a way to win, often with the help of big plays or turnovers or a boost from the home crowd. We'll see. But LSU's version of Death Valley can hold more than 100,000 spectators. And the Tigers also have an NFL prospect at quarterback in their fifth-year senior, Garrett Nussmeier. However, fourth-year head coach Brian Kelly has been under siege from many fans and media because LSU is averaging only 26 points per game, which ranks 12th in the 16-team SEC. And the Tigers just were not productive enough offensively in their road losses to Ole Miss and Vanderbilt. This LSU team clearly is built in a defense-first manner with NFL prospects all over the place, including at linebacker with redshirt junior Harold Perkins Jr., at safety with a Houston transfer named A.J. Halsey, and at cornerback with a guy we know well in ACC country, Virginia Tech, former Virginia Tech star Mansour Delane. The Tigers rank 10th nationally in scoring defense, yielding only about 14 points per game. Meanwhile, one of the intriguing things about this 7-0 Texas A&M squad is that under second-year head coach Mike Elko, remember Duke's head coach just a couple of years ago, and a legendary defensive coordinator prior to that, the Aggies have actually been much better offensively this season than they have been defensively. A&M has a dual-threat quarterback, redshirt sophomore Marcel Reed, who has been much more productive as a passer than he was last season, both because of his own maturity and development, but also because of some upgrades in the personnel around him. Reed ranks 4th in the SEC in total offense this year, and he's done a great job of getting the ball to one of the best wide receiver tandems in the entire country. During the offseason, that wealthy A&M program plucked Casey Concepcion from NC State and plucked Mario Craver from Mississippi State, two less wealthy programs. Now, both of those players, Craven and Concepcion, rank among the best wide receivers in the entire SEC, and KC also is one of that league's top punt returners as well. Bottom line, there will be loads of NFL caliber talent on both sides of the ball in this one, and something tells me that the Tigers in front of the 100,000 will find a way to win on Saturday night. Michael Berard, Managing Director Investments with the Founders Group at Stifel, works with a select group of high net worth individuals and institutions to develop and implement investment plans tailored to their specific objectives and risk tolerances. If you are interested in highly personalized, well-researched guidance and outstanding personal service, you can contact Michael at 984-364-2002. That's 984-364-2002. Stifel Nicholas and Company Incorporated, member SIPC and NYSE.
Are you constantly buried in emails, juggling too many tasks, and struggling to stay ahead? You're not alone, and help is just a click away with Emily Parks at organizeforsuccess.com. Emily is a North Carolina-based productivity expert who helps professionals, executives, and teams reclaim their time, reduce stress, and build systems that work. From digital organization to time management and workflow strategy, Emily helps you work smarter, not harder. Visit organizeforsuccess.com and discover how your best work and best life could be just one conversation away at organizeforsuccess.com.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football, powered by our friends at NC Pork. Time to dive into our coaches and quarterbacks segment, brought to you by our good friends at Lawson Insurance, who last year celebrated their 50th anniversary of helping DG and many other North Carolina citizens and businesses with their personal and commercial insurance needs. You can reach out to the brothers, Ken Miller and Michael Lawson. Like us, they're all huge sports fans. Give them a call at 919-846-2090 or search Lawson Insurance online. DG, we discussed the quarterbacks again last week, so we're going to jump back to the coaches topic, and we'll limit our discussion this week to the teams here in the Bold North State. Now that each of our 32 NCAA football programs have played at least 6 games, that's exactly half of most teams' regular season schedules, which coaches do you believe have done the best jobs of getting the best possible results out of whatever level of talent, depth, and experience they have so far this season?
Well, let's do this Olympics style where we hand out gold, silver, and bronze medals to 3 FBS level head coaches, and then we'll add a few others from the other levels of major college football here in the Bold North State more briefly. My gold medal, at least here at midseason, we can reevaluate later, goes to first-year Wake Forest head coach Jake Dickert. The Demon Deacons have only a handful of special players. They haven't been very good overall either on offense or on special teams, and they don't have a single above-average quarterback on the entire roster, yet they're somehow 4-2, and they have been highly competitive in all 6 of the games they've played. That is a massive tribute to the coaching staff. One reason we have shouted out Coach Dickert and his defensive coordinator, Scotty Hazelton, on previous shows. Remember, too, that the ACC office essentially apologized to Wake after one of its officiating crews failed to call an obvious penalty, an offside penalty against Georgia Tech in a late game situation where if the penalty had been called, as it definitely should have been, the Demon Deacons would have been able to run out the clock and post a victory over the nationally ranked and undefeated Yellow Jackets. What a win that would have been, should have been for the Deacs. Despite that painful snafu, I would argue that Coach Dickert and his staff have been able to manifest just about everything good that this roster has to offer, and that's a very exciting sign to see for any program, especially one under a first-year head coach. My silver medal goes to at least first-year full-time East Carolina coach Blake Harrell, who was the team's defensive coordinator prior to being promoted to interim head coach at midseason last year, after very dramatically turning that ship around a year ago and leading the Pirates to that bowl victory over NC State, of course. Harrell had the interim label removed, and for the most part, ECU has looked pretty good again this season. The Pirates throw the ball very well, and they play very sound defense, and that combination should keep them in the top half of the American Conference this year. One thing to remember here for important context is that ECU's only 3 losses to this point are by a touchdown at NC State, by a touchdown at Tulane, which is 6-1 as we speak, and by a wider margin against BYU, but that's a BYU team that's now 7-0 and ranked number 10 nationally in one of the polls. Meanwhile, the Pirates truly dominated their opponents in all 4 of their victories. In this state, this year, that is good enough for the silver coaching medal. My bronze medal goes to second-year Duke head coach Manny Diaz, who would have gotten the gold here if his team had beaten any one of its 3 toughest opponents, Illinois, Tulane, or Georgia Tech. Instead, the Blue Devils are just a solid 4-3 so far this season, with convincing victories over the 4 teams they were supposed to beat, Elon, NC State, Syracuse, and Cal, but also those disappointing losses to the Illini, Green Wave, and Yellow Jackets. Turnovers were the Blue Devils' main problem against the Illini. Special teams mishaps ultimately doomed their efforts at Tulane, and red zone errors cost them dearly against Georgia Tech in a game that was tied at 10 after 3 quarters. At 3-1 in the ACC, Duke still has a legitimate shot at a trip to the ACC title game. So if the Devils can clean up some of those errors and ultimately make that trip to Charlotte, Manny Diaz will end up an outstanding candidate for a lot of prominent awards in December. Beyond the FBS ranks, last but not least, as we like to say, the guys who come to mind are first at the FCS level, Trey Oliver of 5-2 NC Central and Kerwin Bell of 5-3 Western Carolina. The Eagles have a very real shot to win the MEAC again, and the Catamounts have a legitimate shot to win the Southern Conference for the first time in school history. So enough said. In the Division II ranks, the two head coaches who immediately come to mind are both men we also mentioned in our shout-outs last week, Richard Hayes Jr. of Fayetteville State and Maurice Flowers of Johnson C. Smith. Coach Hayes has the Broncos a perfect 4-0 in CIAA play, and Coach Flowers has the Golden Bulls 6-1 overall and ranked number 22 nationally. Those two in-state teams join an outstanding and nationally ranked Virginia Union squad as the most likely to end up in the CIAA championship game later this year, which will be played right here in Durham, NC.
Hey folks, DG here. When I want authentic Italian food served with a side of NC State tradition, I head to Amedio's restaurant. For 60 plus years, Amedio's has been feeding fans, families, and sports legends with unforgettable pasta and pizza and with Wolfpack pride on every wall. It's an absolute must-stop located right near the NC State campus. Check out the menu, place a catering order, or reserve your table for lunch or dinner today at amediosrestaurant.com. That's AMEDEOS restaurant.com. So you too can experience a true Wolfpack and Raleigh classic.
Welcome back to This Week in College Football, powered by our friends at NC Pork. Finally, DG, we always like to offer some quick mentions about those making positive headlines on the gridiron, especially here in the ACC or across North Carolina. With that in mind, we bring you our weekly fun facts and shout-outs, brought to you by our good friends at Jimmy's Bar and King Neptune Restaurant in Wrightsville Beach. Jimmy's has a full bar, nightly drink specials, and live music 365 days a year. And right next door, King Neptune has become one of the best restaurants in the entire greater Wilmington area. Keep up with Jimmy's on Facebook and Instagram at Jimmy's Wrightsville Beach, and learn more about King Neptune Restaurant at neptuneswb.com. Okay, DG, what do you have left for us in your college football notebook as we head into Week 9?
We begin with a fun fact, this time from an Atlantic Coast Conference member beyond the bold North State. Georgia Tech is off to its first 7-0 start since 1966, meaning almost 60 years ago. At the time, the Yellow Jackets were in their 22nd and final season under legendary head coach Bobby Dodd. That Tech team ended up playing in the Orange Bowl and finishing number 8 in the national polls. If you're a younger person and perhaps don't recognize the name Bobby Dodd, that is the same man who led Georgia Tech to a 12-0 season and the national championship way back in 1952 when the Yellow Jackets were still members of the Southeastern Conference. And he's the same man whose name is still on the field in Atlanta, where the Ramblin' Wreck plays to this day. At this point, it has been more than a decade since Georgia Tech even finished the season in the national top 25. And in the Yellow Jackets' first 3 seasons under head coach Brent Key, they never finished better than 7-6. Yet here they are, 7-0, ranked number 7 in both major polls, and heavily favored in Atlanta against Syracuse this week to get to 8-0. The Jackets are not a dominant group this season. In many advanced team metrics, they don't even rank among the top 25 nationally, but they have been elite on special teams, very productive and efficient on offense, and good enough on defense so far. They also have benefited from a relatively weak schedule. Their best victory so far was probably their 27-18 win last week against Duke in Durham. And they needed that egregious officiating error late in regulation just to survive a game at unranked Wake Forest with a 30-29 overtime victory. Nevertheless, 7-0 is 7-0, and making the right kinds of history is something to be celebrated. Remember, among our FBS programs here in North Carolina, NC State hasn't won an ACC championship since 1979. UNC hasn't captured one since 1980, and Duke hasn't claimed that crown since 1989. And here's one more example from beyond the ACC. East Carolina hasn't finished a season ranked in the national top 25 since 1995. No matter what happens with Georgia Tech the rest of the way, and the Yellow Jackets still have challenging games at NC State and against Pitt and Georgia in Atlanta, this year's Tech team already has made first time since 1966 history with that 7-0 start, and that definitely deserves a fun fact style tip of the cap. Now on to this week's shout-outs, which include coaches and players from Duke, East Carolina, NC State, and Western Carolina. First, though, shout out to Louisville, and especially third-year head coach Jeff Brom, who has the Cardinals back in the top 25 after their 24-21 victory at previously undefeated Miami, which had been 5-0 and ranked number 2 in the polls going into that game. In the history of Louisville football, the Cardinals had played 18 true road games against top 10 opponents, and they had lost all 18 by an average margin of 26 points. This time, though, they outcoached their opponent even more than they outplayed their opponent, and that is a huge tribute to Coach Brom and the rest of his staff. Here's what I mean about the extremely important coaching aspect of this story. Louisville scored touchdowns on its first 2 possessions at Miami, and after the game, some of UM's defensive players said the Cardinals did a handful of things offensively that were not on any video from any of the Cardinals' previous games. By the time the Hurricanes made the necessary defensive adjustments to those things they said they had never seen before, Louisville already had a 14-0 lead in a game they ended up winning by only 3 points. That is great coaching. Meanwhile, Louisville's defense going against, remember, Miami's 6th-year senior quarterback Carson Beck, the Georgia transfer that some had started to hype as a Heisman Trophy contender, not us, became the first unit ever to intercept the veteran quarterback 4 times in a single game while also stuffing the Hurricanes' high-powered rushing attack. That also requires great coaching and execution. Finally, after lining up for a chip shot field goal attempt, Louisville executed a fake that got the Cardinals a first down inside the Miami 1-yard line. That led to a touchdown, meaning the Cardinals got 7 points on that drive instead of 3 in a game, again, that they ended up winning by only 3 points. That is great coaching. I don't want to take anything away from the Louisville players here. We have talked all season about sophomore Isaac Brown, a guy Brom signed out of the Miami high school ranks. How's that for some tasty icing on top of the win over the Hurricanes? Brown, we've described as one of the best running backs in the entire ACC. We've talked all season, including during last week's preview of the Louisville-Miami game, about senior Chris Bell as one of the best wide receivers in the entire country. Both of those guys, by the way, were signed and developed by Louisville straight from the high school ranks. They're not transfers, and both had very good games at Miami. Brown ran 15 times for 113 yards against his hometown Hurricanes. Bell had 9 receptions for 136 yards and 2 touchdowns. In the end, of course, coming up with a plan that enables your best players to show why they're your best players also is a tribute to great coaching. So again, kudos to Brom and his staff for their absolutely brilliant contributions to that program's history-making triumph at number 2 Miami last Saturday.
Sports are awesome. But is Sport Clips better than sports?
Because Sport Clips is sports. Plus,
A neck and shoulder treatment.
Sport Clips. It's a game changer.
Closer to home, shout-outs to a handful of players at Duke, ECU, and NC State for putting up the kinds of numbers that here at midseason place them among the top 10 statistical leaders nationally in the entire FBS ranks, which is not easy to do at this level of college football now that it has 136 teams. At Duke, quarterback Darian Mensah is second nationally with 316 passing yards per game, and he's tied for 8th in the country with 17 touchdown passes. As we've said on previous shows, the Tulane transfer has more than lived up to the hype and his multi-million-dollar paycheck during his first season in Durham as just a redshirt sophomore who's already on the NFL's radar. Also at Duke, senior wide receiver Cooper Barkate, a Harvard transfer who developed into an FCS All-American during his time in the Ivy League, has continued his remarkable success during his time with the Blue Devils. He ranks 8th nationally with 92 receiving yards per game. On the defensive side at Duke, senior end Vincent Anthony Jr., a product of Jordan High School right there in Durham, who now has 35 career starts for hometown Duke, ranks 8th nationally with 10.5 tackles for loss and 10th nationally with 6.5 sacks through the Blue Devils' first 7 games. At East Carolina, quarterback Caton Hauser is 9th nationally with 284 passing yards per game. He's a redshirt junior who transferred to ECU from Michigan State prior to last season, a former 4-star high school prospect from California who was entirely a backup during his 2 years with the Spartans. A 6'3", 225-pounder, Hauser clearly has clicked with second-year ECU offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach John David Baker. That pairing played a central role in rescuing the Pirates' topsy-turvy 2024 season from near disaster, and now that same duo is one of the main reasons, along with a solid and well-coached defense, why the team still has high hopes for a strong finish here in 2025. At NC State, sophomore quarterback C.J. Bailey ranks 9th nationally in throwing accuracy with a 72% completion percentage. Redshirt sophomore running back Hollywood Smothers, a Charlotte product who transferred to the Wolfpack from Oklahoma prior to last season, he ranks nationally with 105 rushing yards per game. And 5th-year senior linebacker Caden Forum, a guest not long ago on the David Glenn Show, ranks 9th nationally with about 10 tackles per game. If the Pack can somehow lick its wounds and recover emotionally from its ugly loss last week at Notre Dame and play well at Pitt this week, I definitely believe it's a team that's good enough personnel-wise to beat Georgia Tech in front of the home fans at Carter Finley Stadium on November 1st, and I am dead serious about that. Finally, shout out in the FCS ranks to Western Carolina, which has become one of our state's most fun teams to watch under 5th-year head coach Kerwin Bell, a former Florida Gators quarterback way back in the day, and a longtime offensive guru who, remember, led Valdosta State to the Division II national championship back in 2018. This year's Catamounts rank 7th nationally in total offense at almost 500 yards per game, and they have one of the most exciting players in the FCS ranks in redshirt sophomore quarterback Teron Dickens, someone at this point we've shouted out multiple times on this show, including when he set that all-time, all divisions NCAA record with 46 consecutive completions in a single game, a comeback victory over Wofford earlier this year. Dickens is only 5'11" at most and 180 pounds, but he's now completing almost 80% of his passes and averaging almost 400 passing yards per game, 2 insanely impressive numbers that would lead the entire nation if Dickens had played enough games to qualify. When Dickens missed the Catamounts' first 3 games this season while dealing with eligibility issues, they went 0-3. Since his return to the lineup, they have gone 5-0 while averaging more than 42 points per game. Among the 32 NCAA football programs here in North Carolina, the teams with the best chance to win their conference this season may be NC Central and Western Carolina, both FCS programs, although it will not be easy for either team. The Catamounts are a perfect 4-0 in Southern Conference play, and now they have an open week, but they then have to tackle maybe the toughest 2-game stretch of their league schedule at Chattanooga on November 1st, then home against nationally ranked Mercer on November 8th. Western is seeking its first ever football championship in the SoCon, a league they joined way back in 1976. And the Catamounts definitely will be worth watching no matter what happens in Cullowhee or otherwise as they continue to chase both that elusive SoCon crown and a rare invitation to the FCS playoffs. I'm David Glenn, and those are my fun facts and shout-outs as we head into college football's Week 9 right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
Thank you, DG, and thanks to NC Pork for being the founding partner of the North Carolina Sports Network. A quick reminder, DG and his staff are posting daily articles at our fast-growing website, ncsportsnetwork.com, which also has direct links on the homepage to this YouTube channel, which now ranks in the top 2% in the world with almost 50,000 subscribers, and the wide variety of places you can get on-demand audio and podcasts of this show, The David Glenn Show, and all of our other offerings. Meanwhile, our never-ending statewide travels continued last week with 3 stops. Thursday in Greenville, we were part of the festivities leading up to ECU's nationally televised win over Tulsa at Dowdy-Ficklin Stadium. Friday in Wilmington and Wrightsville Beach, where we celebrated our annual Football at the Beach weekend with stops at the original Saltworks for breakfast, Jimmy's Bar for lots of football, tasty beverages, and some live music, and then King Neptune for a fantastic dinner. And finally, on Saturday, we were in Little Washington, where we were part of the Smoke on the Water Festival as part of our season-long Whole Hog Barbecue series. What about this week? Well, we're back in Chapel Hill on Saturday morning in the hours leading up to UNC's noon kickoff against number 16 Virginia in Kenan Stadium. As always, we hope to see all of you there. For DG, I'm Chris Edwards. Thanks so much for joining us for this week in college football right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
This has been Bold North State Football Daily, an exclusive presentation of the North Carolina Sports Network. Make sure you follow us on social media at the NC Sportsnet, and check out our website that is wall-to-wall coverage of North Carolina sports at ncsportsnetwork.com. Our foundational partner is the North Carolina Pork Council, raising the bacon, raising the bar. Telling the stories of the bold North State, this is the North Carolina Sports Network.